I know some people are trickling in, so I'm going to go ahead and present our presenter for the November, actually, colloquium. So welcome to the STE colloquium. Our presenter this time is Mia Hines, Ms. Mia Hines. The title of her presentation is Recruiting, Retaining, and Advising Students of Color into Teacher Preparation Programs. A little bio about Ms. Mia Hines. Ms. Mia Hines is an academic advisor for students enrolled in the BS/MS teacher preparation programs within the School of Teacher Education at Florida State University. In this role, one of her priorities is to increase the number of teachers of color going into the classroom. Prior to working at FSU, she worked in the UConn School of Education, where she helped create recruitment and retention initiatives that increase the number of students of
Sorry.
Did you hear at all?
You muted.
I was muted the whole time?
No, not the whole time.
Oh, okay.
Not the whole time. Sorry. So you turned it over to me, I imagine.
Yes, go ahead. Yes, it just the whole thing. So I just popped up as saying that I was muted. So I wasn't sure if hopefully everything I was not muted. So go ahead, go for it, Mia.
So welcome everyone. I am going to go ahead and share my screen and get started. Thank you for the introduction. As was said already, my name is Mia Hines, and I'm here today to talk to you about recruiting, retaining, and advising students of color within teacher preparation programs. Feel free to ask questions as I go along in the presentation, in the chat or out loud, so that we can kind of have a dialogue and a conversation as we go through this presentation. So before I start presenting about anything, I always like to tell a little bit about myself. And kind of how I've come to do this work and be involved in this work, and just also me and my background as a former education student and a student of color. So a little bit about me. I began my college career as a secondary education math major at the Pennsylvania State University. And I did that for the first 3 years. And I had a lot of experience that my students right now experience as students of color. There was a lot of microaggressions. There were feeling lonely. I was one of probably about 200 students that was a student of color in the College of Education at the time. They have increased those numbers since then, but that was back in the 90s. And I was struggling. I was struggling in my math courses, not in my education courses, but I was struggling in the math courses. And my advisor was a godsend. And she realized that this was something that you needed to think about. And she was a woman of color. Her name is Maria Schmidt. And I have to give all credit to her, because without her, I probably wouldn't have made it through college. I did decide to switch my major and go into another major in the College of Ed, which was rehabilitation services. And she facilitated that. She helped me find funding. She gave me jobs. She was able to talk to me about things that were happening in my classes and experiences that I experienced with some of my white faculty and peers. And she just really was a support. And so a lot of the work that I do, I have seen her do it with me, with others, and I continue to do that. So I went on after that to get, like I said, to get a BS in rehab services from Penn State, and just learned about different forms of counseling, realized that I know I still wanted to be an educator. So maybe in the classroom wasn't my space, but being an educator, I could actually support students in a different way. And I came upon school counseling. I went and got a master's in school counseling at from the University of Maryland, and I worked as a high school counselor for about 7 years in Prince George's County, in Guilford County, and in Davidson County in North Carolina. I focused heavily on college and career prep and making sure that students were prepared for college, specifically students of color and underrepresented students, and making sure that they had access to get there. I then went and got a master's of ed in educational leadership from High Point University and admin, and got my admin licensure, and kind of worked with my principals on some leadership teams, and then thought about transitioning into higher ed. I transitioned into higher ed because I often help students get to college, but I wanted to see what it was like to help them get through college. And what was just so amazing about what I found when I was transitioning into higher ed was a mirror of what I was passionate about and what I loved, which was education. And I was able to become an academic advisor for teacher preparation programs, and just opened up a whole world of recruiting and retaining more teachers into the field. And so I've been doing that for the past 6 years. And I'm also currently a doctoral student in the Educational Leadership and Policy EDD program at FSU. So that's a little bit about me and my journey, and we'll talk more about some of my experiences as we go through the presentation. So 20%. Wanted to put this up here, 20%. There is a national shortage of teachers of color. There's only about roughly 20% of our teachers in the classroom are teachers of color, compared to 80% that are white. And there are about 40, probably 50% of our student population are students of color. And if you know anything about research or educational research, research says that representation matters, and that students of color tend to do well and better academically when they have a teacher of color in the classroom. And there are a lot of different reasons why that is. But it's really important for us to start making sure we mirror what our student population is to our teacher population. And so that is why it's really important to increase diversity in the classroom. So a lot of times when we talk about recruitment and retaining students of color, we never really talk about why. We never really talk about why there's not a lot of teachers of color, where that came from. And as I started to do this work, I like to just give like a little background of why that is and how it all began. So if we think back to Brown versus the Board of Education, we remember that there were schools were segregated, and there were Black schools and there were white schools. And we had obviously Black educators and teachers in those Black schools, and then there were white schools where there were white teachers. Well, when Brown mandated the desegregation of public schools in the South, it provided no protection for the 82,000 Black teachers in US segregated schools. And these teachers were deemed unfit to teach white children. So those 82,000 Black teachers were not given jobs in the white schools. And so they had to be, they were left to find other employment. And that is the beginning really of our teacher shortage with teachers of color, because they started to go into other sectors, and education just became a place that they were not welcomed anymore. So really, we are still struggling trying to get students to think about education as a career choice because of what happened back then. So before I go into the set strategies that I have for you, I want to talk a little bit about some of this work that I've done. I worked with the American Association of Colleges for Teacher Education, AACTE, for those of you that are familiar, for about 3 years at UConn, the NEAG School of Education. We were a part of a network improvement community, and there were about 10 institutions, and we developed recruitment and retention initiatives that members would then take back and implement at their own institutions. So we took that, and we would meet about how the initiatives were working, how the strategies were working, and then we would critique them, and we would do more. And we would meet, I think probably a couple of times a year. We would meet up, and we would also have webinars and have phone calls. But there was also, keep in mind that there was also no financial backing for this. So all the institutions that were a part of this work had to provide their own funding and their own resources to implement this work. AACTE would provide some travel stipends to get to a meeting if we needed to, but not to implement anything in the institution. So a lot of the things that I was able to do was because we were a part of this NIC, but the resources was provided by the institution. So teacher demographics. I like to give a picture of where we are. As I said, nationally, we have about 20% of our teachers are teachers of color, 80% are white. In the state of Florida, we have about 33% of our teachers are teachers of color and 67% of them are white. And in our BS/MS teacher education programs, and that is the program that I am an academic advisor for. Right now, we have roughly about 29% of our students are students of color and 71% of our students are white students. I like to break down the BS/MS Pathways program even further. So right now, these are all the 3 cohorts of students that we have enrolled in our program. We have roughly around 371 students total from our 2018 cohort, our 2019, and our 2020 cohort. And then as you can see, I break down even further how many students of color and what are the races and ethnicities of those students. It's really important for you to kind of break this down when you are trying to figure out how to recruit and retain more students of color, so that you can have a visual picture of where you are. So as you can see right here, we're in 2020, and we have quite a larger influx of students of color this year. We have 56 students of color. I will talk a little bit more about why that is later on in the presentation, but 29 of those students that were admitted for the fall 2020 have been admitted conditionally because they did not pass 1 or more sections of the general knowledge exam, which is an entrance exam that you have to have in the state of Florida to get in a teacher preparation program. We were able to admit those students conditionally this year solely due to the pandemic. If it had not been for the pandemic, we would not have those 29 students because they did not have the test in time in order to apply. Also, keep in mind, you want to make sure when you're looking at your data, you break it down. 39 of our students are identifying as 2 or more races for 2020. And I want to go all the way down to 30 of them are Hispanic and white. So when you're looking at our data, our students are selecting their race as white, but their ethnicity is Hispanic. And so we have to make sure that we're capturing those students as well as a part of our data for students of color, because they are, when we pull them up in our system, they are Hispanic and white. And if we were just looking at their race, then we would only capture them as white students. So that's also really important to keep in mind when you are looking at your data. So recruitment initiatives. I like to break down recruitment initiatives into 3 categories: K through 12 settings. So making sure that we are recruiting high school students, but also sometimes reaching down to the elementary and middle school students to start them thinking about education careers, community college settings, and then also at the university. So what are you doing to recruit students at the university? So the first thing I'm going to talk about, and all these initiatives, a lot of them I've already done. I'm implementing some of them here, but I've also already done them in other places as well. So first thing is future teacher club partnerships. So making sure that you do informal presentations at their schools, plan trips to the university. We have partnered with our future teacher clubs here in the local area. And we also go, I have gone, and I know that the STE has gone to the annual conference that they have in Orlando every year. And we do work that, work a table there. So making sure that you build partnerships there. Participate in high school career fairs. So if the high schools have career fairs, try to get a table. And a lot of times high schools will say, well, it's only for the institution. It's only for the admissions office. But I always still try to press to say, hey, can we just get a table? Because it's really important for, it's lovely that the admissions officers are there, but they are not going to sell education or talk about education in the way that we are able to talk about education and also recruit students. So I have done that in the past, and I think that that's really important. One of the things that I'm looking forward to trying to do at least in our local area in Leon County, and try to figure out how we're going to do that in the pandemic. So the other thing that I have done before in the past is create an annual Future Educators of Color High School Conference. So this picture down here in the corner right here, this is a group of students that we would bring from local high schools, and they were all students of color that said they were interested in education. We would bring them together and we would have a high school conference. We would talk about what it was like to be a college student. We would talk about admissions. We would get an admissions rep to present to them. We would get a financial aid rep to talk to them about financial aid and scholarships and grants and how you apply for that. And then we would also have current students talk to them about what is it like being a student at a PWI in a teacher preparation program that also is predominantly white. And why is it necessary to go into education, and talk about their experiences. And we would have a fun-filled day, provide them with a lunch, give them a tour of the university, and then send them home. And so that was something that was started annually every year, and it started to create a pipeline of students that would stay connected to me as an advisor and also to students, but then also apply to the university and then eventually apply to the teacher preparation program. Other college visits that you can, or that I've implemented before that you can definitely do are elementary school visits. I know a lot of people don't like to put a lot of time and effort into elementary and middle school, but it's really important if you can to just go and present. I would go sometimes to former students' classrooms that were elementary teachers, if they would invite me for like a college day, just to start to get students to think about education as a solid career. Because we all know that you start thinking about kind of what you want to do at a young age and instilling that in them. Also, going to the elementary school, this picture right here, we went to Pineview Elementary and we presented students with books, with FEA. And so that's really important for students to see us as people of color that are coming into their school. They're predominantly students of color, and providing them with some tools for them to be successful, but also talking to them about becoming an educator. And also university sponsored high school programs. So I know that we have some TRIO programs on campus, and inviting them to come to campus, or actually taking part in doing a presentation maybe during their summer portion of the program. The other setting is community college setting. So these are our students that are our transfer students. And sometimes it is hard to capture all of our transfer students and to support our transfer students. But some of the things that is very helpful is to create a partnership with the local and feeder community colleges. So right now, OASIS advisors are attending FSU at TCC. I think that's FSU Day at TCC, should be, every semester. And so our advisors in OASIS, they go and they are capturing students that are interested in education and sharing the admissions process and everything that they need to apply with them. They're also providing office hours at TCC, and they go at least once a month, and they're talking to the students about their courses, what courses to take, because a lot of times students that are transfer students, they're not familiar with what they need to have in order to get into the program. And especially if they're coming from a different institution, they need to make sure that they have all of those prerequisite classes in order to get into our program. Also meet with the teacher prep liaison at TCC just to gain a better understanding. So I often reach out to our liaison at TCC to see how her students are doing, what her students need, what resources they need in order to apply to our teacher preparation program. The other thing is I've done is provide general knowledge workshops. So as I said before, one of the barriers to getting into teacher preparation programs is always those entrance exams. So our general knowledge exam, I've offered workshops on TCC's campuses, and I've also invite students to the ones that we have at FSU. So for this fall, we've obviously had to do those virtual. So we have had virtual workshops, and I was able to invite all of the state and community college students, not just TCC, because we're in a virtual, you know, I understand that we're in a pandemic, but some of it has been used for our, you know, can be beneficial to us because it allows students that we might not have had access to gain access to some of our resources. So students some of our students from Miami-Dade Community College came to our workshops so that they can also start thinking about taking the GK test. A couple of other things that I've done at the university setting is at FSU, coordinate and facilitate all of the FTCE general knowledge workshops and tutoring programs. So we train tutors, which are current students, to facilitate the sessions. We pay them. We do provide a small stipend to those students. They have taken the GK, they've done well in the GK, and they actually are also utilizing their skill sets and creating, you know, to train or tutor students. We also do workshops and one-on-one and or group tutoring. We offer that every semester. We did that since last fall. We did it in the spring. We did it this fall, and we will do it in the spring again. The internal students have access to borrow one of our GK study guides. We do have resources and books, and they can come and borrow those at their will from OASIS. And then we also invite all NFA students. We invite exploratory students. So we contact advisors that might have exploratory students on campus. And then we also reach out to our community college students. So all of those students are able to come to the workshops that we have if we are virtual or in person, and they are able to participate in those. What I have found that has worked best for the general knowledge is breaking those workshops up by subtest so that we can focus on one area per workshop. And then if students need additional support, they will reach out to one of our tutors to get more one-on-one support for that actual subject area. A couple of other things at the university setting that has been very helpful is teaching the EDF 2085. And in the past, I've also taught a course very similar. And this semester, we are able, for the spring 2021, we have been able to restrict that section to freshmen and sophomores only. I taught it, I am teaching it right now, actually. I've taught it in the fall. And there are a few freshmen and sophomore, but mostly juniors and seniors that have already committed to a major and plan on graduating in that major. So we want to use this as a recruitment tool so that we can start talking to students about the major and about education and keep them interested. Because one of the things that we have to remember is that students will start off as a freshman, but they cannot most of the time apply to the program until the end of their sophomore year. So we have to make sure we're keeping them engaged in education and keeping them connected to the College of Education so that they can come into the school and not switch into another major. One of the things that I would like to do for the fall is to make sure that I'm letting university advisors know about this restricted section. So the exploratory advisors, care advisors, advising first advisors, letting them know about the restricted section so that we can have, so that they know their students can come into this section and not into maybe another section where there are upperclassmen as well. Also a care weekly table. So we were able to do this last year with student ambassadors. This year, however, with funding, we were not able to hire our student ambassadors, and we have not been able to do as much as we wanted to do with CARE this semester, but we definitely plan on trying to pick that up again for spring semester. But one of the things that I would suggest is hiring students of color for this position, because representation is important. So it is okay to have student ambassadors that are possibly not underrepresented students to go into CARE. But when the students see someone that looks like them, there is a connection there to say, hey, they look like me. I possibly want to go into this field, and I think that I'll probably be able to do it too, just from the mere sight of each other. And then also other connections come as they get to know people. or as they get to know the students that are helping us recruit. But I think it's really important to have representation in that area. Information sessions that are specific to students of color. So for the CARE program, they have the summer bridge, and also during the school year. One of the things that I'm going to increase in the spring is, I know we're trying to get settled in this fall semester, but in the spring semester, I would like to do more virtual information sessions with our CARE students and making sure that we capture them while we have them. Also reaching out to SGA agencies for students of color and underrepresented students. So they have the Black Student Union, they have the Asian American Student Union, Hispanic, Latinx Student Union, and the Pride Student Union. All things that I have done in the past. And all of these will allow you to start building relationships with students on campus, and they will start to come to you. They will and start to apply to the program. And so it's really important, because a lot of times students don't know all that they need to know in order to get into the teacher preparation programs. And they also sometimes are not familiar with who they should contact, or they might not have seen themselves. And so they don't think that that is a career choice that is accessible to them. I've been talking a lot. I want to just check and see if there's any questions before I go on.
I'm not sure if you're going to go over this later on, but I know retention of teachers is an issue. Do you do anything in like building resiliency in student or pre-service teachers of color to help them stay in the field once they get there?
So absolutely, Jennifer, and I'm actually going to go into retention next.
That's what I was like, I thought you might, but.
All right, so I'm going to I think this might be the last thing that I want to talk about for recruitment is marketing strategies. So making sure that we have culture responsive marketing materials. I enjoy that we have videos on our website of our students, and Lauren right here, her video, she talks about being a minority and being a student of color, and what that is going to do for her students, and how she knows that representation is going to be important for her students. And I love that. And I think that we have to just make sure that we have those present on the website at all times, but also in pamphlets and anything that we kind of create. And sometimes it's okay to create pamphlets that are just tailored to a specific population. So whether that be students of color or high school students or transfer students or community college students. Because representation matters. I've been saying that this whole presentation, but it really does. And this is just an example of one of the flyers or one of the brochures from when I was at UConn, and we talked to our marketing and communication folks, and they started to kind of see the value in having some of our current students. So this is one of a current student that was there at the time, and she was in her classroom doing student teaching or doing practicum, and they captured that and used that for one of their brochures. So I'm now going to go into transition into retention initiatives. So one of the things that is really important is mentoring. And so with AACTE, with the NIC, that was one of our largest things that we did at our institutions, was developing a mentor program for prospective and students of color. And our mentors can be K through 12 teachers, administrators, and alumni. I am currently working with Penn State in an alumni group with other educators of color to start a mentoring program for students there. And so the dean and my former academic advisor, who is now the dean of multicultural programs, reached out to a group of alumni and said, you know, our students are struggling and we need connections for them. Would you all mind putting together this alumni group for students of color? And so we can also pull on our alumni to become mentors for a program as such. Provide culture responsive training to mentors. So some of you might be like, well, why do we need to provide culturally responsive training to them if they're already people of color? Well, what I discovered in building mentor programs is that not all of our educators are culturally responsive, regardless if they are people of color or not. And so it's really important that we gave them that training, and so that they could know how to mentor our students, what our students were going through, but also being culturally responsive in their own field and in their own classrooms or in their own school buildings. Host one event per semester. So it'll be really important to make sure you get your students and your mentees and your mentors together at least, once per semester, bring them all together, give them maybe something small to eat, but it's important for community building. So engaging them in discussions about being a teacher of color and a student of color and a PWI and a teacher prep program. A lot of you will be amazed that students a lot of times don't really talk about what they're feeling or how they're feeling with being in a predominantly white program until they get into a room where they feel as though the space is, number one, comfortable and also safe. And a lot of conversations come out of these types of discussions, a lot of encouragement to continue in the field, because there will be teachers that say, I'm in my 10th year of teaching and this is what I've experienced and this is how you can get through it and this is what you need to do. And so also talking about retention when they get into the classroom, because what happens is they might have this support here at the university, but when they get to the classroom, they might be the one of only in their school building. And so a lot of times it's important to have these mentors to talk to our students about how to navigate the school when they are there as a teacher. And that is they are the classroom teacher. Mentors and mentees, they can connect with each other all year long, outside of these large groups. And they can decide to, get a coffee or, correspond through email or on the phone. But it's really important for students to feel like they have somebody else in that field. One of the issues that has come up with mentoring a lot, from what I've seen and the work that I've done, is funding. So our teachers and our administrators and our alumni, they're already tasked, right? They have a lot that they're doing in their own schools. This is volunteer a lot of times out of the goodness of their heart, but also they feel the need to give back. And so funding became an issue because the commitment would start strong, but the commitment sometimes died down. And what I found is that, if we could pay our mentors, a small stipend, not a lot of money, a small stipend, I feel like the commitment might be a little stronger. And so we were able to find some funding from a donor that was interested in pouring into teachers of color and provide a small stipend to mentors, and also in return provide a scholarship to students of color that were a part of the mentor program. I left that institution right as that was about to pick up. But that is one thing that sometimes created barriers for the mentor program. Another idea is annual celebration. So making sure that we kind of bring students together in some way. All of our students of color, celebrating them, but also providing spaces for them to network with other teachers, administrators, alumni, community stakeholders. So creating a event, some type of annual event that's kind of celebrating the fact that we want to see them in the classroom and the fact that they need to be in the classroom. And what I would usually do is recruit a local keynote speaker who was current leader in the education field. This picture over here, you might recognize her. That is Johanna Hayes. That is when she was the National Teacher of the Year. No one knew at that time that she was actually going to become Congresswoman Johanna Hayes, who she is now. She is, I think, the first Black woman, a woman Congresswoman in her district in the state of Connecticut. And so she came one year and spoke at annual celebration. And oftentimes, we just try to get people that would be able to pour into our students and support our students. And so also getting your students to help coordinate, facilitate the event. They can be student speakers, get our students to be MCs. They can help with the registration. It provides a sense of community, connections, and also leadership skills that we're giving our students. A lot of students that I have had in the past, they were nervous, super scared about public speaking. But through giving them leadership roles such as this, they were able to kind of tackle that and also handle being able to speak in public about their experiences, about being a student of color, about becoming a teacher of color. And they're doing some really great things now that they are actually in the classroom. Another one of the areas for retention is scholarships. So funding is always a big deal for most college students, but definitely for students of color. We do have the Florida Fund for Minority Teachers at FFMT, and that does award students up to $4,000 a year. So we make sure that our students are aware of that when they come into the program as a first-year student and that they can apply. There is a GPA requirement for that. But also thinking about developing College of Ed or STE specific scholarships for students of color. Could be supported by donors that want to help increase teachers of color, because it's always really important. You won't believe how many emails I get from students to say, you know, I am running out of funds. I don't have any money. I don't know if I'm going to be able to continue. And if we can try to help alleviate that burden of students to stay in the program, that would definitely be helpful. Also thinking about a graduate assistantship. There was an opportunity. I would often have a graduate assistantship that was housed underneath of the advising office that I had access to give to a master's student every year. I understand here we would not be able to do that all year, but because our students are doing their internship in the spring, but possibly thinking about something like that for the fall only. And that would help students a lot. So relieving some of that tuition, especially because we know the graduate tuition is much more than it was for the undergraduate program. The other retention piece that we're doing this year is the GK course that I talked about. So this year, 29 students of color were admitted in the fall without passing one or more sections of that GK exam. These are just a picture of the actual workshop schedules and the virtual group tutoring that we did. We ran it for about 6 weeks and we had 4 tutors, and there were 2 students per subject area. And our students went to those workshops, they participated in group tutoring, and so far I've heard really great things. We don't know how it's going to turn out for them passing the test yet, because a lot of them have not been able to schedule a test yet, but we are also going to run these workshops in the spring and then encourage them to take that test. These students do have to have the test taken and passed by the end of their senior year, which is next year. So March 2022, we are expecting them to have that test passed because we do know that they need it for certification. Does anybody have any questions about retention before I move on to the third section? Okay. All right. So advising is the last piece. So we talk about recruiting. We always talk about and retention, but we often leave out advising. So it's really important. And I want to tell you a little bit about my advising, what I do as an advisor to help students of color. So the first thing I always say is intrusive advising. If you don't know what intrusive advising is, it really just means you are getting all up in their business. You are getting to know them. You are building relationships with them from day one. You are asking about their family, about their background, about their history, about their education history. Are they working full time? Do they have to support other family members? We're getting phone numbers fairly quickly into the conversation so that if I can't reach you through email, then I can reach you by phone. And you also have access to me as well in that way. So that has always been really important. And I know that Education 101, we all know that building relationships with our students is so important, because if we don't build relationships with them, then we can't teach them, or we can't advise them, or they won't come to us. The other thing that I make sure I do is advocate for students. So whether that is in the classroom, sometimes students might come to me about situations that has happened to them in the classroom with other peers or faculty. And I am either advocating for them or I am trying to talk to them about advocating for themselves. So it's really important that I am there for them in that way, but also building the relationship with faculty in a way to say, hey, this student has come to me about this, and I'm just trying to figure out how we can support this student and what we can do. Field experiences. A lot of our students of color are going into buildings, as we know that they might be the only one. They might be the only student of color in that building, and they might not get a lot of support. And sometimes you won't believe how many stories I have of students that will come and say, this teacher said this, or there's a lot of microaggressions happening, or I don't really know what to do with this. How should I handle this? And sometimes, it's just not a good situation. And we've had to remove students from field experience placements. And because it's not a good placement for them and it is not a good placement for the cooperating teacher. And that is okay. We will work with the cooperating teacher, or we will work on that. But sometimes we need to understand that we are there to support the students, not the cooperating teacher in that way. At least for me, I am there to support the students. We should try to support cooperating teachers and provide them some culture responsive training as well. But first and foremost, we need to make sure our students is having a good experience. The third thing is policies and procedures. There are some policies and procedures in education that are not culturally responsive. And it is important for us to always come to the table and to have an open conversation about these policies and procedures that might be creating barriers for our students of color to either come into the teacher preparation program, continue in the teacher preparation program, or to just get into the classroom. And that is also one of the areas where I also will come in and have conversations about. And sometimes it's not a policy or procedure that is at the college level or the institution level, but it might be a policy and procedure at the state level. And we have to make sure that we are trying to use our experience, our knowledge, and our resources to try to advocate for our students at that level as well. The other thing is financial aid opportunities, making sure that our students have financial aid, they have the aid that they need in order to finish. So that's giving them scholarships. We have scholarships that are offered in the College of Ed, but there's also some grants, some national grants that they can apply to, but then also just making sure that we find other ways to make sure that they can stay in the program. Personal and mental health concerns. This has been the #1 thing that I have had to work with this year. A lot of our students are struggling in the pandemic. They have a lack of motivation. They have a lot of personal issues that they are dealing with and having to support people. And so that is another area that I will come in and make sure that our students are receiving the resources that they need. And then also just celebrating them. Like, I believe in showing up for my students. And these are 2 pictures of showing up for my students, that we're celebrating them, that we are there during scholarship banquets, maybe birthdays, maybe they just need to go and have a cup of coffee, or they just need a donut that day or something. So, but making sure that we show up for our students is really important, because students, sometimes they definitely need that. So next steps, I want to just leave you all with some next steps on ways that I think that will be helpful for recruiting and retaining students of color. So a few recommendations is funding allocated for recruiting, retaining, and advising students of color. So all of the things that I've talked about, obviously a lot of those, you have to have funding. You have to have the resources. You have to be committed to doing it, and you also have to put the money to do it. Some of the things can be done without, but a lot of them you have to have the funding. I have in the past had a budget and was able to allocate some of those funds towards recruiting and retaining students of color. The other thing is developing state committee task force for recruiting, retaining students of color in teacher prep programs. So in the past, I have sat on state task force for minority teacher recruitment, and they had district leaders and state College of Education representatives and Department of Ed reps. And so a lot of the policies and procedures that I talk about, districts kind of and state leaders put their resources together and they pushed against some of those policies and they were able to create change. So it's really important to kind of come together as a state so that we can kind of figure out what's happening with teachers of color. Why are we maybe not recruiting or retaining teachers of color as we should? And what is happening in the field? Create student organization for students of color interested in teaching. So just two of the pictures that I have here. At a previous institution, there was a student that felt as though she was one of many. And she actually created an organization that has now grown into a very large organization, and it is a university recognized organization. So they are getting funding from the university, but they are also have a commitment from the College of Ed that will also support them in some endeavors. And so this organization builds community, as I said before, among students of color. It allows them to want to continue in the field, and they were able to, bring speakers to campus. This one picture right here is Dr. Christopher Emden. For those of you that might know him, he's at Columbia University. He has a few books, and he is a science educator. That is his background. And they were able to bring him and, speak to all of the College of Ed students, not just students of color, but also provide workshops and PD and presentations to all students. And then also every year taking students to present at conferences such as the National Association for Multicultural Education, which is NAME. If none of you have ever been there, it is an amazing experience. There are all educators all over the world that come that are committed to multicultural education, diversity, and equity. And these students will go every year and just talk about their experiences. And it would really just give them the motivation and kind of the experience they needed to kind of keep pushing forward in this field. The last thing is developing program for high school students of color that are interested in teaching, which hopefully might informally create a pipeline for students to apply to FSU and then into the College of Ed, into the BSMS programs. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but I think it came out maybe yesterday, but the Ed Trust definitely put out a report. And they put out a report for diversity and equity and teacher preparation programs. And Florida, unfortunately, is failing in all of the 4 areas. We are not meeting the needs of recruiting and retaining teachers of color, and we must do better. And that is all. Before I go, I like to talk about why the point is. So the point for me is Super Bowl. So Super Bowl is like graduation for me. So the whole point of this is for our students to graduate and then eventually go into the classroom. And so I always call it my Super Bowl, but it is like the end, and that is where we want to get students. So that is really important to me. And that is all I have. Any questions?
I'll start off with a question, Mia. You don't mind. So first of all, thank you for this presentation. It is clear that you are very passionate and knowledgeable about what you do. And I think I speak on behalf of a lot of the faculty here at FSU that we're so fortunate to have really great advisors like yourself who are so dedicated to our students. Now, something that really struck me was when you were talking about your style of advising our students, in which you are really, connecting deeply with students and personally. And I know from just, getting to know you and getting to know many of the advisors in our program that you very much do this, right? Students are calling you, and students are, you do genuinely know each of our students, especially those who are struggling or who are vulnerable. You know them at a deeper level than most of us who are just having them in classes and instructing them. But I'm curious for those who, for yourself, as well as advice you might have for other people who are going into advising, like how do you do it? Like, how do you maintain your sanity, right? And how do you kind of protect your heart, right? When you are kind of dealing with really emotional issues, and especially currently, you know, the pandemic is exacerbating things. So how do you maintain your sanity so that you can provide your best self to your advisees and the students who need you?
Good question, Veronica. Students are struggling a lot this year, and it is hard. Because of my counseling background, we're always taught in counseling is that you can't solve every problem, and you are not going to be able to fix it. And you have to compartmentalize it. You have to say, I am there, I'm trying to help, and I'm supporting students. But I can't fully put that on me as a burden. Because if I put it on me as a burden, then I won't be able to move forward to help them. Then it becomes my problem. And so I often will do that and say, you know, it's so unfortunate that you have to go through this, and I'm going to support you in every way I can. But I have to, at the end of the day, I have to just be able to, separate myself from their problems and being able to help them to bringing it home. And also another thing that we say in counseling is that sometimes you need to go sit on somebody's couch. You need to have some counseling yourself, you know? And it is just, you know, if you are taking on so many problems and burdens of other people, you have to be able to release that somewhere else. And I'm a firm believer in that, and that's what I do.
Thank you. We very much appreciate everything you do, even if you don't hear it.
Thank you, Veronica.
Mia, I'm going to ask a question, and it will seem like either a lazy or crass one, but it's Friday afternoon. First of all, thank you very much for bringing up the Brown versus Board of Education thing. That this isn't the problem of underrepresentation of teachers of color is something that we made. It's not just something that just happened. But you've gotten to know us now, and thank you for staying. What if you could make like a plan for us? What would be top on, some highest on your list for us to be able to diversify our teaching ranks?
Well, the number one thing I think that I said in the recommendations was funding. To be honest, Sherry, a lot of the programming that I feel as though would be very helpful, you have to have some funds to do that. So if you're having, community building, if you're doing some celebrations, if you're bringing students together, you have to be able to maybe provide a small lunch or, pay for a speaker to come in. And so that's really, really important for doing a lot of the work, is that, the college and the school has to have a commitment of funding provided to diversifying the teacher workforce.
Well, I had hoped, we are FSU, which means we don't have much funding. So maybe one day when we could sit down and have a coffee, like strategize like what it would take. Sometimes it's easier to find little pockets of money from strange places because it's not going to come from our E&G budgets unless we decide to quit doing something we're currently doing now. And I think we all feel like we hold things together with duct tape and baling wire. So like, that doesn't seem to be an appropriate response, but trying to think about, what would be a legitimate, what could get us somewhere. And sometimes when you have success, then it sort of breeds further success.
And in the meantime, you're not going to have the funding right away. In the meantime, trying to find the resource, but in the meantime, just hitting the ground. And, like I said, fall has kind of, allowed all of us to kind of, fall on our faces a little bit, but hitting the ground and just presenting and going in front of any student organization. So I definitely plan on doing a lot more reach out to our SGA organizations on campus, asking to come to a meeting, trying to reach out more to the high schools and see what we can do virtually. And also to CARE, making sure that we tap into the great center that we already have on campus, that it has a lot of underrepresented students. And so those are definitely some things that we probably could push more into, for sure.
How do you feel about extending the waivers around having the GK before admissions? Would that be a benefit?
Absolutely. As you can see, it allowed 29 more students of color to come into the program. And so that's very helpful. My dream would be to eliminate the exam altogether, as I have done in other institutions or other states. But that is something that does not happen overnight. That comes from all institutions working together and pushing against that policy, and that is a barrier to students of color. But the waiver for admissions, I think, is definitely helpful. And we saw that just in the mere numbers. So that, I think, is something that we might want to look at continuing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. There's some questions in the chat.
Yeah, Mia, someone asked about the report you mentioned right before you started taking questions, if there was a way that we could access that, or if you could say the name of the report again so that we can...
I will put it in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, I first want to start off by saying thank you for your presentation. And I also want to let you know that there are people in their friendly cousin college of communication science and disorders that would really benefit from this information. Have you, or could you, or would you be willing to, with assistance, any of the above, be able to put together maybe like a step-by-step how-to so that this sort of process can be executed there? Because there's a, excuse me, a great need for it. And I'm very impressed with how everything kind of came together.
So thank you. Is it Denisha?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Denisha. Definitely send me an email and we can chat. And I think my email is up on the screen, right? Or did I stop sharing?
You stopped sharing, but if you want to put it in the chat box, or I think it's also on your, I don't know if it's on the flyer or not, but we can make sure that it's shared when it goes out on social media and whatnot, if that's okay with you. Okay,
now I will put that in the chat box right now. I'm putting the link for the EdTrust, report that I was talking about, and I am putting in my email address as well.
Thank you.
Hey, Mia, I have a question, or really, I guess it's sort of a Mia and a shared question. It's a follow-up to what she said about what can we do. And I wonder about if you can share a little bit about, one of the things I think that's most impressive is you're talking about strategies that go beyond what's happening within a department or even within a college to make this happen. Clearly, these are systemic issues. It's going to take a systemic approach to resolve them. And so, you know, there are limitations within our own department level budget for what can be done, but why are we only looking at our department budget? So can you talk about strategies or ways that you've seen other people do this that's beyond a department budget? Like I am thinking Florida State has a whole task force right now that's working on these issues that this is very much so related to. There are several national foundations in the US that are specifically focused on these issues. Clearly the EdTrust report is funded by the Kellogg Foundation and all these other foundations. How have you yourself or others seen others do this where they seek that kind of funding, and how can we strategically do the same thing? Because we actually don't need our budget. We can get this funding elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Thanks, Nicole. I think that what I have seen in the past is people kind of coming together, and some faculty have done grants and introduced that to the advising office and saying, you know, hey, I want you to be on board with this because I'm really, I think this is important that we recruit and retain students of color, but also a lot of funding sometimes that for the programs that I was doing was coming from donors. So we would invite donors to all of our programs, and they would start seeing, you know, things that we were doing. They would start talking to our students, and we would go on dinners with them. You know, I understand. We all know that there is a courting process that happens along with donors, and we wanted to get added to that. And we wanted to get added to that portfolio. And so it was just a matter of talking to our foundation people and making sure that we were also on the books for when you are saying, these are the programs that we have, and making sure that we got money for our students. And that was one of the ways that we were able to get more funding outside of just the general budget.
Thank you. I think those are excellent strategies. And I see Bob Eklund's on our call here. I think it's something that we should talk to the dean about, and to Kevin Daraberry, not the college's development office, but also connecting to FSU's foundation office, because those folks sit with donors, just like you're talking about, who could certainly be motivated to be engaged in this kind of work and support these sorts of efforts.
Absolutely. I would definitely love that. Mm-hmm.
Well, it is 2:01, so we are officially out of time for this colloquium. If anyone has any final questions or thoughts for Mia, if she's available to stay on for a few minutes to chat, that would be great. Otherwise, thank you everyone who attended. Be on the lookout for information coming for our final colloquium for 2020. And you'll be seeing information coming around. So thank you all. Happy holidays. Everyone. Yes, happy fall break and all of that to everyone as well. Stay safe. Well.
Bye.
Me, I just wanted to say that was swell. It was super helpful to hear that.
Thanks, Sherry.
And I got a couple emails from faculty while you were talking saying it's so good to have you here.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Allowing us to be much more responsive than we have been in the past. And it's a good kick in the butt. So I'm just tickled pink to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Yeah, my name's Monique, and I'm a first-year doc student here in the College of Ed. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about like how I'd been a public school special educator for almost 20 years, and just thinking about the trajectory of my own career and how if I had any of that support, either before entering into the field of education or the support during, how different my career might have been. I might still be in the classroom now if I had any of that. And so I was just wondering and thinking, just as a doc student who has been an educator, how I and other Black doc students might be helpful in this, like any of the programming or supporting students. I know you said something about mentoring, which I would love to do, but just how do you see doc students fitting into this puzzle of encouraging? Because I'm thinking about even the trajectory of Black academics, you know, to like even say, hey, it's not just like, you know, me teaching at a public school or a private institution, but I can actually, you know, aim myself into the academy. So how can we be helpful in that?
Well, thank you for that, Monique. That's definitely, I would say, in the form of mentorship, just like you said. So in the past, doc students as well, so students of color that were in some doc programs would come in and, you know, do some informal mentorship. So, and sometimes when you talk to our students, as you said, they want to go into the classroom, but they don't want to stay in there for long. They also want to go into academia, and they want to become faculty as well. And so it's really important for them to say, oh, wow, you were in the classroom, and then how did you transition? A lot of students sometimes have questions about, how did you leave? How did you transition? Like, tell me more about how you got to where you are. So I would say I see doc students helping out in the form of mentorship, but also with just programming, because you've been in the classroom. And so you actually know what they are going to be up against when they get into the school. And so I think that you all can definitely be a great asset. I'm gonna reach out to you. What program are you in?
Email down. I'm in the R2D2 fellowship in the Reading and English Language Arts program. So
okay.
It's a reading disabilities and dyslexia program.
Okay, great. Okay. Yeah, so I think that Okay, definitely. Yeah, email me and we'll chat.
Okay.
Thanks, Monique.
No problem.
I had a question for you, and it might be sort of outside of the scope, but I've been reading about self-efficacy for teachers, and there's some evidence that shows that teachers are less self-efficacious with students that they don't identify with as closely. And my guess is that's some of the discrepancy, right, between performance of students of color and students who are white. So what, in the context of preparing future teachers, how do we help future teachers make that, I feel confident, or make that connection, like just overcome that concern that they might not be as self-efficacious with students of color as they would be with one of their students who is more similar to them?
That's a good question, Addie. Is it Addie?
Yes.
That's right. Okay. So one of the things that I think is very helpful is culturally responsive training, teaching. And so oftentimes, this is not just BSMS program. This is, teacher ed wide. They'll only give our students one culturally responsive training course. And then that's it. And they're off to try to figure out, well, what does that even mean? How do I do this? And so instead of just having one course or two courses, making sure that we're embedding it in everything we do. And also when they get into the schools and talking about their experiences when they get into their internships and their practicums. And so relationship is really key, because I will have white students come to me and say, I feel really uncomfortable about this situation. I don't know how to work with this student. But if the student doesn't feel comfortable with me or doesn't have a relationship with me, they're not going to come and tell me that. They're going to figure it out on their own and possibly do harm. So I think that it's really important for us to, from number one, have relationships, but also continuing to talk about how do you work with people that don't look like you? And where is some of those biases coming from, or feelings? Like even in the EDF 2085 course I teach, the Teaching Diverse Populations, that's a course that students take prior to getting into the program. And we talk about ethnicity and race and what does a classroom look like, and the histories, and the language that you're saying. And a lot of times students are like, oh, I didn't know that was deficit language. That's just what I heard. So I just thought that that's what I should say. But you have to break down those things and saying, wait, let's say that, one of the number one things is like, well, parents aren't involved. They don't want to come to the school. No, let's talk about why maybe your parents aren't coming to the school. It could be that they've had bad experiences themselves in education. It could be that they have left it up to the teachers, and they feel like they thought the teachers were supposed to do right by their students. Mm-hmm. Or it could be that they just don't have access to get where they don't have the knowledge. And so a lot of times our pre-service teachers will just take what they've heard, how they grew up, and then just run with it instead of just really kind of figuring out for themselves. And I think it's really more about like diving deep into some of those topics and issues that, oftentimes we don't talk about in teacher prep programs.
So the cultural responsive training that we do is like a one-time deal?
So we have a culturally responsive course that they take. I believe they take it in their senior year or master's year. Can't remember where they take it at, but it is a course. It is a course that they take. But I'm thinking more than just one course. It really should be embedded into, if cultural responsiveness is embedded into the culture of your teacher preparation program, then your students are going to be good when they get into the schools, your white students and your students of color. Because sometimes what we don't know, as I said, we as people of color perpetuate some of the stereotypes and the barriers and the biases that also have been put to help hold us back. Because that's how we will have been trained, is ingrained in us. And they don't also know that they're perpetuating that. Yeah. And I think that it's really important for everyone to talk about being culturally responsive.
Thank you. It's such a complex thing. And it's unfortunately so hard to talk about like authentically right now. Like, I feel so cautious to say anything because I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Right. And sometimes it's just okay. Just, you know, you have to say, you know, I might not say the right thing, but I'm going to start a conversation, and we all might not say the right thing. You know, sometimes you got to just, you know, say it, and let's just start having a conversation about it. And I think the more we talk about it, the less uncomfortable people will become.
Absolutely. Well, you're very approachable and a great resource. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Eddie. Did anybody else have any other questions?
There's nothing in the chat. Jenny popped in our curriculum map for the BSMS so we could see. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah.
And Addie, are you a student? Are you a faculty member?
No, this is my second year in the special education PhD program.
Okay, awesome. So doc student too. Okay, great. Awesome.
I didn't know that about you.
I was afraid to ask when everybody was there because
No, absolutely not.
I didn't know you were a doc student, Mia, until you said that. I hadn't realized that was also another hat that you wear. It's quite amazing, everything that you have going on.
Yeah, I started that this summer. So,
okay. So it's fairly new. Okay.
It's fully online, and it's really it's a great because it's online and it is not in person. So it's able to fit into your schedule. So,
yeah, but still.
But it is a lot.
It's a lot. I was going to say.
I have a few major assignments I need to work on this weekend.
Well, don't get behind because someone might be calling you about your assignments not being due.
That's not going to happen.
Well, thank you. This was wonderful.
Yeah,
wonderful presentation. Yeah.
Thank you all for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Appreciate your willingness to come and talk.
Absolutely. So hopefully, you know, we get to work.
Yep. Make some great suggestions. So.
All right, y'all. Well, if no one has anything else, I guess it's a wrap.
I think it's a wrap. Yeah.
Bye, y'all. Have a good Thanksgiving. If you celebrate,
I'll see you.